You ready?
Um, yeah, wait, one. Yep, we're good.
All right. Welcome to Wizard Team, a Black Magical podcast for Black Magical stories.
Hi, everyone. It's Bayana and Robyn embarking on a journey through the many fantasy stories written by and about Black people. We're continuing our mini series today discussing Black Panther's Tales of Wakanda. And today we're talking Robyn's short story pick, Heart of a Panther.
Okay, so here's my pitch for those who are wondering if this is the best story in the anthology. I don't know if it's the best, but it's my favorite, and it could be your favorite too. If you are interested in urban fantasies, hidden magical places, and large magical creatures, ever wonder what would happen if the riches of Wakanda were available somewhere else? Then Heart of the Panther by Cherie Renee Thomas is the Tales of Wakanda story for you. Bum, bum. Um, I like this story because just to get straight into it, like it goes, you spend a good amount of time in Wakanda and a good amount of time outside of Wakanda. Um,
Mhm.
so the story opens with T'Challa speaking to Adisa, who is an elder in charge of tending the heart-shaped herb, and her family has done this for generations. And she tells T'Challa that the heart-shaped herb is dying, and that they cannot find any physical or logical reasons why the harvest is failing. She's like, the vibranium soil is rich, all of the nutrients are showing up in the herbs, and yet T'Challa is like holding one of them, and it's wilted and like putrid, like so sweet that it's like putrid is what he says. Um, and so uh, she also says that without a successful harvest, they may not be able to pass the Black Panther powers on to the next king. Um, they might be able to do one more king, but after that, if they don't have a solution, they might be able to like salvage enough for one future king, but after that, um, there would be no more Black Panther. And T'Challa hasn't visited these groves in years, and it was like since T'Chaka died, and he was actually given the power of the Black Panther, and um, and he just feels like he's like struggling, feeling kind of like a failure, but also um, feeling like the disconnect between himself and the throne and the Black Panther. Not so much in a way, in the way that I read it, like not so much that he uh, doesn't want the throne or thinks he doesn't deserve the throne. It's more that he's like kind of struggling with the fact that he doesn't really want it, and it was kind of thrust upon him. He had to challenge his uncle, and it seemed like because his uncle was not the best for Wakanda, so he feels
Mhm.
kind of like forced into this position because he's the best for the job, but is not certain about whether or not he actually wants the job, which I get. Like there's so many
Yeah.
things, especially like in my family, where it's like, well, you're the one that does this thing. Christmas decorations. Ma'am.
She said, I like Christmas decorating.
She's like, Aminata comes. It's a fun time.
Mhm.
Um, I've been assigned to decorate the Christmas tree since I became an adult. I'm allergic to Christmas trees. I don't know why that's my job. I don't know, but it is.
Yeah.
And it needs to get
I
done. Like if we didn't have a Christmas tree, my mom would be in a mood. We'd all be in a weird mood, you know?
yeah. Yeah. I definitely get that as a older sibling, older sister.
Yeah.
I get that all the time. It's literally like, I don't know how this ended up being my job, but I guess it is, and I guess we're doing it. Although, leading a country is definitely uh
The stakes are a bit higher,
it's a
you know.
just a little bit. Just a little bit.
A little bit more
Yeah, but it's like
responsibility than like planning the family brunch that's always on
right,
you to figure out.
right. And like it's interesting to like it's clearly connected to why he hasn't been to these groves in so long. Um, like you can just kind of feel his like reluctance and like just kind of not like his disconnect, I guess, from um the like traditions of Wakanda, and not necessarily because he doesn't see the value in them, but because now he's kind of the maybe because he's the figurehead for them and it's not something that he really wanted or, was trying to do. Um so yeah, and in some ways it kind of is like, is that why things are going wrong? Is it because you're not feeling connected like to it that it's starting to die? And that's like kind of a question as it goes on.
Yeah. And so Adisa does say, like, hesitantly, he's like, just, be harsh. You don't have to sugarcoat things for me. Um, that he needs to look for spiritual reasons for the crop failure because basically they're all of the like natural scientific reasons. There are no explanations there. He mentioned something about like his father T'Chaka like banning all shamans, so that kind of makes a little bit of sense why Adisa is like hesitant to like bring this up. Um, but then it was like funny to me because I'm like, well, why didn't they fail when T'Chaka was over here banning magic as the Black
But I
Panther?
assume it's probably because it like takes time, I would
Yeah,
assume.
yeah, I think
Um
it's kind of it becomes this thing of like through each generation they're getting more and more disconnected from kind of the magic and like the spiritual in terms of like shamanism and like leaning more into like science and technology. Um, but you talking to a god. I mean, we talked about this a little bit in Portia's story last week too, where it's like even if you're not super spiritual or you have a heart or you're more scientific leaning, like, sir, you have the powers of a Black Panther. You're about to go,
right.
like, your shaman is telling you that the heart-shaped herb that gives you these powers, the crops are failing, and that you go look spiritually and maybe talk to someone on the ancestral plane, which you can visit physically.
Mhm. Yeah.
I don't understand how much more evidence you need, but apparently. Um, so T'Challa visits Djalia, which I didn't remember that being the name, and I felt like really like excited about learning that name, even though I'm sure I've heard it before and just forgot because the it's the ancestral plane in
Mhm.
all caps. Um,
Yeah, I feel like, especially, like, for us who mostly interact with the world through, like,
film,
the movies and film, um, they don't name as many things. Like, we don't get the name of the city, you know what I mean, in
yeah,
the movies, or we don't get certain things that, like, then you're, like, reading this or, going back to the comics and it's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, like, these do have names." It's just that it's kind of either not referenced because it's not necessary, or it's, like, simplified, um, in the movie.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And so this part of the story I thought was really interesting. So T'Challa visits the ancestral plane and is met by a Black Panther that transforms into his mother, Nyame. And then she's joined by other Panthers who she explains are elders from the time of Bashanga. And T'Challa is like looking at these ancestors and is like, I don't understand that. The language you're speaking, they were in garments that I have never seen before. And it's one of those things where I kind of think about like, if I was to go to the ancestral plane, I'm thinking about this with like Legendborn too, right? When Bree goes on that memory walk and she's going further
Mhm.
and further back in her line and her lineage, like there
Mhm.
is a certain point in which it's like they're so far removed that they may as well be strangers.
Yeah.
And just thinking about like, you know, we think about like how Wakanda is always talked about as being uncolonized and untouched, but like it's still touched by time and like
Mhm.
people and cultures change on their own. So like even the fact that like the language has changed, I thought was really interesting because it's not as though, you know, they were all speaking Yoruba and then were forced through colonization to pick up English or French or whatever. Um, they're speaking a native language. It's just been changed through time, like the same way that like
Mhm.
you read English from Shakespeare's time, it doesn't sound like the English of today, and like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so I just really liked that these elders just seem so foreign to him, and so he's having a hard time trying to figure out what he's supposed to like learn from them. So Nyame is like focus on their meaning, focus on um concentrate on their meaning, don't concentrate on like the words. And so he starts to like really listen or really pay attention. And so he gleans that they're telling him that he needs to cross the big river and ride the great, or cross the big water and ride the great river to its mouth. And he must find the stone that is free and return what was lost. And so he is like repeating these things to himself. He doesn't really understand. But then later on, when he's like back on the living plane, I guess I don't know what our 616. I don't know what it's
The
called.
right.
Um, but he's in bed and he's like thinking about these words and he's like, oh, I need to go to the Mississippi. So I need to cross the Great Water, which is the Atlantic Ocean. And then he's like, the First Nations called the Mississippi River the Great River. So that's probably where I need to go. And then he starts to use his kimono beads to like do some research and find a House of Flowers arboretum in a historically Black town called Freestone. And, you know, they told him he must
Boom.
find the stone that is free and return what was lost. So, you know, Freestone. Um, he then goes to find
I
Shuri.
sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
real
Go ahead.
quick, I just wanna say, like, I am just not that person who's good at riddles. And I think it's because I'm, like, generally take things literally, and it's hard for me to, like even if I know that it's not like, if alright, let's say, obviously, if there's, like, figures of speech or, like, certain moments in certain contexts, like, I can read into that. But if you're
Mhm.
just straight up giving me a riddle, I'm gonna be like, "Look, this could be anything. I'm gonna need a clue. I'm gonna need to be pointed in a direction, and then I could maybe figure it out." But like, just you telling me this, I'm like, okay,
This means nothing to me.
yeah, literally.
Yeah, I think it's really funny too because I forget. I was reading some book and like the person was like, if you come to me with one more goddamn riddle, if you don't just say it plain,
That's what I'm
what
saying.
book
It's
was
just
that?
I feel like that's a lot of different books. Like
It's
they
a
always
lot of
got
books.
some, especially fantasy books. There's always some
Yeah.
like old or like ancient
Yeah.
being who's like, I'm not gonna tell it to you straight. I gotta tell you in this little way
I have
for
to
whatever
speak in
reason.
rhyme.
I gotta
Like,
speak,
bitch,
yeah. And I would just be like, look, I'm going home.
listen. Right.
Y'all must not
You
want me to
don't
fix
you
this.
find
I'm
somebody
done.
else. Obviously, I'm not the one. But this is like
Mm-mm.
to me, I didn't think of it as a riddle so much as I thought about it as like a very literal translation, like a kind of word for like, he's trying to he's trying to understand the meaning of basically an ancient language.
Right.
So
Right.
it's
It's like
like
kind of like
me when I'm
reading
reading French.
Shakespeare or something.
Yeah, and I'm like, I get the gist of what they're saying, especially when I'm reading like, I mean, when I used to, because even now I don't know if I could. My French has died on the vine, but when I used to read in French, I would be like, I know this shit is beautiful. It's a romantic language, but me and my crappy translating skills, because I never got to the point where I like understood French in French. Like I had to like translate it into English, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, like you're
yeah, I'm
thinking
like,
in English.
yeah, I'm thinking in English. So I would always be like really like just disappointed in myself because I'm like, I know this is, especially like music, like because I love French music. I'm like, I know I'm really tearing this up, but that's how I thought about it as opposed to a riddle. So it's like he gets the gist of what they're trying to say, and then also those ancestors don't know the Mississippi River. They would only kind of know it as like the Great River if they knew it at all. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. I don't know how the ancestral plane works, but it feels like
Yeah.
they're not in. They might be in contact with like the first people,
Right.
but they're
But I
not
was
in
also gonna
contact
say,
with
like,
like
it's
the
also
native.
interesting the information that Wakanda has about other places, especially some place as far as America. Like, I get that, like, by this point, it doesn't really say what time it is, but the assumption is that it's like present day.
Yeah,
Um, I'm curious about their archives and how they build them, and whether this is information they got later on, or if they really had folks. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, I guess there's still war dogs. War dogs been out here for some time, and we see in some of
mhm.
the other stories, um, like earlier centuries where they are still active
Wow,
across the
yeah,
world. Um, and so yeah, I'm just curious about like how they gather this information and then like store it for him to be able to look and be like, oh yeah, so that's what, like, like native folks were calling it in the Americas.
yeah.
Um, it's just like, where'd you get that information from? And it could just be cool, right? It may not be anything super like elaborate, but I'm just interested in like what their databases look like.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like if you type in the Great River, you could get a couple of
Right, like the
uh
Nile is one, but he's like,
yeah,
okay, you don't gotta
you don't
cross
have
a
to
big
cross the big water.
big water to get there.
That was the thing
Um,
for me because I was like, cross the big water to get to the Great River. Like, is the Great River not the big water? Oh, okay, okay.
right.
He
It's
like
just
knew
too many.
immediately I gotta cross the Atlantic, so I gotta go
It's
to
the
America.
ocean. Right.
But why wasn't it what is it on the other
The
side? The Indian
Indian
Ocean?
Ocean.
Yeah. And then go
I'm
to
saying like,
the I'm sure there's a Great River on that side too. Anyway, he figured it out. This part of the story, I felt like it was like out of place or it didn't go like very far.
mhm,
Or it like relied too much on like expecting you to kind of have previous context. And like I could figure it out, but it just felt strange. Um, Not in a I didn't, but in a way of like I wanted more or like to know more, but to do
mhm,
that, it would no longer be a short story. Um,
mhm,
but so he sees Shuri at Warrior Falls, and he's like, they've been struggling to be close since he became king, and they're like finding their way towards it, but she's kind of been removed and in her fields. Um, and he tells her that he needs her to take over the throne while he's gone, and that he doesn't trust anyone more than he trusts her. But she's worried that she is not worthy to take on over the throne. And then ask him to take Okoye with him, but he says he needs to do this alone and that she is worthy of the throne. Um, so I'm assuming that when he had to fight his uncle, maybe Shuri was also thinking that she was going to vie for the throne and then got pushed to the back seat, or I'm not sure. But it felt
Yeah.
like they were also, and I think a part of this is that he feels disconnected from the throne. He feels disconnected from Shuri. So he's feeling very unmoored, I guess.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. And there's like, again, we've discussed our backgrounds
mhm,
on
right.
on like the lore. Because there's also like a few other stories where they have a more strained relationship. And
Mhm,
I think that's one of the things. It's not necessarily a struggle of it's not like, or not a struggle. It's not a bad thing. It's an anthology, so it is what it is. But it's also like you can't really chart this out, the stories
right.
out in like a timeline. It's not like they connect necessarily
To each other.
chronologically. Yeah, like they could be, you know what I mean? Like they're alternate realities in a sense. And so it makes it kind of hard in those moments. Like you can't really connect it to anything other than maybe like a comic that goes deeper into T'Challa and Shuri's like relationship after he becomes king. And like I know that there is some stuff around her. I know at some point she like becomes queen. Maybe that's more recent. I can't remember exactly because
Mhm.
I again have not
Well,
read it
that's the thing
all.
with comics. It's like
Um,
always been like
but
a
it's just
big
like,
barrier. Oh, go ahead.
and there's retcons too, like, you know, so there's
Exactly.
just so many, there's so many like so many different things, which I think again makes sense for this anthology. Like it kind of like follows that in a way. But then yeah, it makes those little moments like that. It just gives you questions, which for in the confines of the story is not like a huge deal, but you still want to know.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's like one of, at least for me, one of my bigger barriers to entry into comics and like keeping up with them is the multiple storylines and the retconning and like where do I go? Because I feel like more of a completist. Like
Mhm.
I am going to give like the novelizations a shot because they just feel more like the world building, and then but you know that there are, like, I know that there are storylines in which their relationship is strained. I don't know the
Mhm.
particulars of those. And also I don't know like which storyline, right? And so it's
Right.
the when reading this, I'm like, I know this is a callback to this, but I don't know which one in particular. And so I think my brain kind of got
Mhm.
stuck on it a little bit. And then
Also, there's age too.
yeah.
Like in terms of like how old are they? Like, you know, the story that we read last week, it felt like Shuri was younger, whereas this one kind of she feels a little bit older. Um
Mhm.
T'Challa, like you know
He's
what I mean?
been
It's just
king
like it's
for a
hard to
while.
gauge.
Yeah.
Yeah, versus like so it's hard to gauge like, okay, what's the full context of that. But
Yeah.
then also it's like I don't need y'all to be like
You don't
3 years ago.
exactly. You
Or-
don't, and to do the full context, you're moving into like this is no longer what this is.
yeah.
So I don't know if I would have preferred it to just like not have been there at all. I don't know. I haven't like really like figured that out part out because
Mm,
I liked it. It brought up a lot of questions for me, but also I was like, what? Why?
mhm.
So yeah, so Shuri asked T'Challa to travel with Okoye. He's like, nah, I gotta do this by myself. He goes to Freestone, Mississippi, and meets Brother Flowers at the House of Flowers Arboretum. Brother Flowers is like, my family calls me Ricky Doc. I listened to the story first
Mhm.
and then read it. When I tell you, because like the narrator, the way he says Ricky Doc, it's Ricky Doc, but I was like, that can't be right. I gotta go figure out what this man's name is. And then I like looked it up and I was like, no, he's saying Ricky Doc,
He's
it's
saying
Ricky
it
Doc, okay.
right.
So it's like,
Just like, are you
Is
sure?
he Dr. Flowers or like what? But you know,
Right.
the country nicknames, you know?
I was gonna say, you know, black people. They just
You just be calling people whatever.
yeah.
So
It was
also
probably
just
he
kind of,
probably was called that as a baby, and then it just stuck.
I know. Um, so I just want to like go back. So the elders told T'Challa he needs to cross the big water and ride the great river to its mouth. He must find the stone that is free and return what is lost, right? So now he has crossed the great water. He has
Mhm.
traveled the great river to its mouth and ended up with their stone that is free, which is Freestone, Mississippi. Now he's meeting Brother Flowers. Um, he's like looking at this house, the House of Flowers, and he's like, it's idyllic and it's got a wraparound porch and a rocking chair. But I'm suspicious. I sense gathering storms. I sense hidden depths here.
Mhm.
I'm like, what?
Right. It's
What is
the
gathering storms?
it's his panther senses.
Yes, like the panther is like hackles up,
Mhm.
but
I really
there's
like this uh interaction, by the way, like
yeah,
this conversation they have, because it's literally that. He's just very
he's
suspicious the whole
he's
time.
very suspicious. He's like reading into all of Ricky Doc's like expressions, micro expressions, like
Mhm.
having tea. Like Ricky Doc's like, I don't trust nobody that doesn't drink sweet tea. Um, like Ricky Doc's asking him about if he's a celebrity chef because he tells him that his name is um, Mr. Okonkwo, a New York chef who has heard that the House of Flowers is like the place to get the best ingredients. So that's like his cover. And so he takes him on a tour of the Arboretum and he's saying, sorry, the dogs. He's saying that he sees big plants that rival the exotic plants in the Alchema fields in Wakanda. One
Is
second.
she asleep?
I think the dogs are out again. I'm gonna see if they can just like keep her while I record. Cause like if they're
Oh, word.
outside, she's not gonna stop. Hold on.
Mhm.
Come on, come on. No? Come. Okay, fine then. Stay in the house. Then be quiet. I love my little anxious being just like me. I want to be out there. As soon as I open the
But I
door, she's like,
don't.
"You want me to go outside?"
Without you? That's
Okay.
hilarious.
Now she's just like staring daggers at me. It's fine. Okay,
Mhm.
so what was I saying? Oh, so T'Challa sees these big plants that rival the exotic plants of the Alkama fields in Wakanda. Um, he says oversized plants, juicy melons, brightly colored squash, and other vegetables that appeared to grow effortlessly out of season. And then there's this huge freshwater catfish pond. And T'Challa and his panther senses hear a steady heartbeat, and he's like, "That can't belong to a single fish." Mm. But he also is like asking some questions, and he notices that like Ricky Doc is kind of answering some of them, um, changing the subject, like kind of
Mhm.
smoothly changing the subject on others. He wanted to see a greenhouse, and that doesn't happen. So he's just kind of like, okay, there's something more here. And once he sees that freshwater pond, he's like, oh, we coming back. So they part ways. He gives him some garlic butter rub. Is that what it is?
I
Something
think
like that.
so.
Yeah. And he was like, "Oh yeah, we coming back." Um, I want to try this
Mm.
garlic butter rub. Uh, so T'Challa comes back as like the Black Panther, and at nighttime he's like in his full suit, um, and he can see now that Freestone is protected by a shifting wall of iridescent light that is like not completely visible to the eye, but he says like rare ones could see. Um, that the shield is part spell and part natural phenomenon, and he names it Aurora Afro Mississippialis, which I thought was hilarious, especially because the Aurora Borealis was like just out, um,
Yeah.
and like further down than ever before. And he's like, "Whoa, are these the Southern Lights?" Um,
Right.
and so as he's like walking back, and I couldn't tell because he parks his car far out, far away from the House of Flowers, and then he's like going kind of by foot as the Panther though. So I couldn't
Mhm.
tell if the shield. I think it says that shield's like it's protecting Freestone, but I couldn't tell like how far or how big that was. It is Freestone. I know it's like a small black town, but like
Mhm.
how small, how is the House of Flowers like on the outskirts of the town, or is it the middle of the town? Because
Center, yeah.
it feels like everything is there because of this arboretum or this
Mhm.
land. And Ricky Doc had said during the tour that they have over 100 acres. They had more, but they had to sell some off just to like, capitalism, keep it going, whatever.
Mhm.
So it was kind of it's an interesting thought of just like where this sits and like how the shield works. Um, but so then he scents herbs, and he's like, "Oh, that's the heart-shaped herb." He can like smell it, and he follows that scent into the greenhouse that he had noticed before, but Brother Flowers had skipped over in their tour. And when he gets into the greenhouse, he sees what he um, thinks are counterfeit heart-shaped herbs, and he pulls one up, and he says like the plant is root strong and resisting his attempts to like pull it up. Um, so they are very kind of similar but different, and he can tell that just like through looking at it. Um, but they are strong and healthy as opposed to the heart-shaped herbs that are failing in Wakanda. So he gets really angry about this, and about like the idea that someone is like stolen from Wakanda and then built this place in Mississippi. And when I first was reading this book, I thought, or reading this story, I thought it was so strange because he had mentioned like, you know, a meteor hit Wakanda way back
Mhm.
when, and that's how vibranium got there. That's how they got, their riches and things. And he has this like fleeting moment of like, did another meteor hit here? But then immediately it's just like, no, this is Steph. Um, and I'm like, meteors hit, it happens. Like, it could be, right? You got the big one, and then it got like a little piece fell off and just ended
Right.
up here. Like, there's like all of these different.
Yes, and though I feel like if by this point, if that was the case, it wouldn't be hidden. Like
Wakanda's hidden.
American but I'm saying Americans would have been found that. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah,
just feel like given the place,
yeah,
it wouldn't have gone the same way.
yeah. And so I was thinking, like, the real question is, why is this like a black town and not like a native town that was like
Yeah,
hidden and shielded? Um,
right.
but it just felt funny to me, and more of a commentary on like Wakanda and Wakandans in general about how their isolation and them being cut off has made them very and rightfully so. I'm not saying that like they should be trusting of the world and like there isn't ample
Mhm.
like endless examples of why you shouldn't trust folk. But it just felt like like his anger just felt rooted in kind of like intergeneration intergenerational Wakandan specific distrust.
Mhm.
Um
I'm like bias.
because and bias, yeah, because like he has this fleeting thought about a different reason behind what's happening, but he and like disregards that completely. He's not asking questions or thinking about whether this happened in good faith, right?
Mhm.
So he's taking um, some of the counterfeit, I put that in air quotes, but like some of these alternative heart shaped herbs, and then he grabs a collection of the seeds when Brother Flowers burst in and hits him. And T'Challa immediately like is like not expecting him to be strong. He says like he has like an impossible strength. He feels every blow, and he hasn't felt pain like that like in a minute. And he's like, I know the heart shaped herb is failing, and I might not be as strong as I once was, but damn, you know. And when he finally um, kind of like gets into the fight, I guess when he's like, oh, okay, we fighting.
We
It's
fighting,
not a
right.
like you got it's not a uneven fight. I'm not like ridiculously stronger than you. He grabs a hold of Brother Flowers and he sees a vision of the elders and a memory that he says isn't his. And it's of blood painted walls in a cave like structure and tortured cries. And that kind of knocks him off balance again. And while that's happening, he is attacked by a winged creature the length of his arm. And T'Challa breaks that creature's wing. And then Brother Flowers cries out and yells at him to stop. Um, but he's looking now at like, he's surrounded by what he calls these giant dragonfly like creatures. And he's like, it's them or me, bro. Like, so I think it's really interesting because immediately it feels like immediately when T'Challa, I'm not gonna say attacks the dragonfly, but like defends himself from the dragonfly and like breaks its wing. Brother Flowers is like, oh no,
Right.
stop, right?
He's like, it's one thing to try to break into
Like
this spot.
me,
It's another to fight me, but not my
not
people's.
not these creatures, right? And T'Challa's like, what are they? Call them off. Like I'm not stopping unless they stop it. um,
Mhm.
and so as he's doing that, and Brother Flower that kind of explains that they are what he calls wild ones from the wild seeds that T'Challa is trying to steal. I was like, wild seed?
Wild
Uh-oh.
seed.
Don't want to go
Aha.
back there. Um, Ricky
Going
Dot
to Octavia Butler.
grabs a rifle. It's like, they're my alarm system, but there's no way I'm letting you leave here with these seeds. Like you can say what you want, but you broke in here and now you're hurting the wild ones and I have a gun claw. And then the child's like, claw?
Claw.
Who?
Who?
um, who? And then Ricky Doc is like, I know about all of your attempts to get to figure out what's going on here and to get our secrets. And he's showing, like, pulling out letters and stuff. And he's like, first you called yourself this, and then you called yourself Claw, and now you're Okonkongwo. Like, I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm onto it. And T'Challa is like, mind is racing, but he also is looking at this rifle aimed at his heart. And he's like, there's more going on here than I originally thought. It's not just them stealing our herbs or like from Wakanda, but I'm not about to sit here with a rifle pointed at me while I try to figure this out. So he escapes, or he thinks he escapes. He's running towards the lake, and then there's a giant owl that swoops down, and then he jumps into the lake and meets a giant whale-sized catfish. And he's like, I'm not about to be Noah. Which I was like, good on y'all for knowing the Bible stories, even though you worship Bast. And so he uses his suit to shock the catfish. And then he's like fighting to get out of the lake, and he's going through these like crawfish and these more of these like dragonflies and like all these kind of very large and very aggressive to him animals.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ricky Doc sees the catfish get stung, and he cries, and T'Challa's like, call them off. We can do this all night, but I'm gonna survive and your wild things will not. Like, I will kill this big ass catfish and fry it up before I let it just eat me.
Before I like, yeah.
You know? And I can tell that they're important to you, and I don't want it to go this way, but I'm not about to let myself get eaten and or torn apart by this
Like,
owl. Like,
imagine, it's like, I'm the king of Wakanda. I got ate by a
yeah,
catfish? Like, no.
woo,
Just can't.
what a way to
That
go.
can't happen.
He's like, I
Sorry.
can't go out that way. Uh, so T'Challa's like, how do you control these creatures? Ricky Doc is like, who are you? What is going? How do you shock a giant catfish, right? So they're just kind of circling each other, like, what is going on? So Ricky Doc explains, like, he doesn't control the creatures, but if you're patient and respectful, you can commune with them. They are like of the land. We're of the land. We live here together. And he kind of understands now that like T'Challa is Wakandan, because
Mhm.
like his family and generations, they have stories of this Panther King, right? So T'Challa's like, how have you not been found out? You got a catfish the size of a whale out here. Your sunflowers don't make no sense. You got broccoli that should not be this large. And he's like, we've been detected before, but the wild ones have stopped anyone from like basically surviving to tell the tale.
Mhm.
And
Right.
he's like, they can grow as big as they want, and they can swim deep into the crevices of the earth. So I'm just thinking, my brain is like, how many skeletons are
Of
stuck in
these.
some like small rock in like
Mhm.
molten lava in the depths of the earth, and or have just been eaten up by a dragonfly. Like, that's how they're getting. That's how they're keeping their secrets.
It's very, yeah. It's one of those where it's like, it's concerning. I have questions, but also you gotta do what you gotta do.
It's definitely, you got to do what you got to do, and it's definitely a like an interesting thought process of like they know who is of the land, I guess, because like they're
Mhm.
attacking T'Challa, but I'm assuming all of the people of Freestone are are who know about them, at least, are safe from them.
Right.
Um, and they just kind of know who is allowed to be there and who isn't. So Ricky Doc starts to tell T'Challa about Dijamone, who distilled what she learned of the world
Mm,
and passed down the knowledge in the Book of Flowers. And says that she was said to be a master gardener, but she was actually a conjure woman who was brought to America as a slave in Maryland or Virginia. And then when slavery was outlawed, she was sold south and ended up um, kind of in Freestone. And that she would talk about Wakanda and how she would be free, and that she waited for them, but they never Wakandans never came for her. And so she's the one that brought the wild seeds. They grow uh, there and they won't move because the earth has changed. The wild seeds have changed the earth there and the people there. So he's like, this is, we are connected to this land kind of like through basically like magic
mhm.
and vibranium esque seeds. And they have no plans or desire to like leave their land. So T'Challa instantly calls Desdemona a thief. And Flowers is like, she wasn't a thief, she was a healer, and she had planned to heal the suffering of the neighboring countries with the heart-shaped herb, but she was kidnapped into slavery. And I think it's really interesting that like you get the sense that like Wakanda has been fighting this like mini civil war with itself for a very, very
Mhm.
long time about their isolationism
Mhm.
and what kind of suffering they allow. Because from this tale, you get the sense that like Dijamona was sold into slavery. So this is like the height of colonization. Um, I don't know if we know like where Wakanda's supposed to be in Africa.
I think it's like
It's not West,
east-ish.
it's East Africa, right? But
Mhm. Like
um
Central East.
trying to think of like the neighboring countries.
I feel like it's supposed to be like Kenya.
Yeah.
Um,
So Ethiopia, Uganda, South Sudan, right? So
yeah.
like these are places like Ethiopia's never been colonized. Um, eh, not fully.
Yeah.
Eh, I always get I always feel a little bit like about the Ethiopia's never been colonized thing, but they also were not immune to the fuckery that was happening at this time and during this time period, right? Um, and so South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya have all been like we're all just overrun
Mhm.
and have been in states of turmoil basically nonstop since the 1800s, 1700s. I'm not a historian, but for a minute.
Mhm.
So you get the sense in this. Oh, go ahead.
No, 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 keep going.
So you get the sense though that like Dijamona does not agree with Wakanda's isolationism, but they also have enough knowledge of what's happening outside of their borders um, to know that people are suffering. And because she's a conjure woman, which I assume is like similar to like the shamans in terms of like having not only healing powers, but like mystical healing powers, she
Mhm.
decides that she's going to take some of their like herbal medicines and use it to help these other countries. And to do that, I mean, you once you leave the Wakandan borders, it's it's kind of North Korea like. It's not allowed to like leave without express permission. Like you need to be a war dog or a spy or
Mhm.
have like royal permission and like be sent out. Um, and so in the eyes of Wakanda, once she makes that decision, she is a thief and she's like a deserter, basically. There's like another story in the anthology about a deserter, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so it's interesting to hear T'Challa kind of black and white, like she was a thief, and Ricky Doc, who comes from her, is a descendant from her, being like, no, she was a healer, and um, she was doing what you didn't have the courage to do, and was
Mhm.
punished for it, um, because
And I think yeah. And I think it's interesting too the way that T'Challa kinda like, eventually gets there, but it's definitely like you're saying, like, it's clear that this is a conversation or at least a struggle that they've had for centuries, which I think also helps to put into context, like, because I don't they're are they open at this point in the story? I can't remember. I
it
think they
doesn't
kind of
say, but
are.
it doesn't really seem like they are fully, or they are. It doesn't really say.
Yeah.
And I got the sense that they
Because I
weren't, but they were closer to getting
yeah.
more open because of the fact that like he doesn't immediately recognize Black Panther. And not to say that
Right.
like Black Panther
True.
is known as T'Challa, but like in when they kind of he is like an Avenger at a certain point, and that's when like
Mhm.
Wakanda's opened up, right? So he's like as a superhero is known. Um, and so I felt like the minute they started to engage with each other and he sees him in this panther suit, he would have been like, "Oh shit, the Wakandans
Oh,
are
the
here,"
right.
or Black Panther is here, right? So
Right. So yeah,
that's
so
why,
maybe it hasn't quite happened, or even if it did, it's like early stages. But I could even see that, like, even if they were open and she got like this still happened, I could still see T'Challa thinking of it in that way,
yeah,
only in like the contextual sense of like this is what we believed back then, and this was what was important
mhm,
back then. Um, so yeah, it's just it's interesting that that's the first thought and that that's not like I mean, it just doesn't seem like it's been interrogated by him yet, so maybe that's
yeah.
yeah.
And it also like it feels to me because Ricky Doc is saying like she smuggled the seeds out in her hair. She like she braided them and she hid them, and then
Mhm.
it's not she wasn't like out here selling the secrets of Wakanda. She
Right.
wasn't, you know, um, she was basically kind of honoring Wakandan traditions with a larger lens of like we should help everyone that needs help.
Mhm.
Um, and because it feels like pretty quickly is sold into slavery. Um, it feels especially harsh for his reaction to be like so black and white.
Yeah.
But also, without her doing that, if the heart-shaped herb dies, it's just dead, right? So you kind of
Mhm.
also like should be a bit appreciative of this. And the idea of like T'Challa knows like what the diaspora has gone through and what someone black in Mississippi especially has gone through, and so should be, maybe doesn't know, like obviously doesn't know it intimately, but like
Yeah.
they the history of the diaspora, especially if you spent your entire life hiding from it. Um, and so there's something like I think really special and I personally think beautiful about like Freestone and its existence and it like helping
Mhm.
and like there being this like pocket of people who were safe. Um, it also gives me the what were they called? We were just talking about this because you were reading a book about it and I saw a documentary about them, the Moors or
The Maroons.
the Maroons.
Mhm.
It like reminded me of that. Um, as like a hidden settlement that kind of grows and flourishes.
Mhm.
I thought it was cool. So, um, Ricky Doc says, you know, Digimona had planned to heal the suffering of of like neighboring countries of her neighbors before she was kidnapped into slavery, and um, says to T'Challa, I'm quoting this part because I think it's like just a beautiful piece of writing. Everyone carries a city inside them, a bit of the home or the place that shaped them. Your city is just buried deeper than most. And it kind of goes into that going way back to like the hardship herb dying like spiritually type of thing
Mhm.
is that um he's he's not he doesn't feel as connected to the land. Like his first thing for Ricky Doc is like, why are y'all still here? Like
Right.
it seems like you're uniquely vulnerable. Um, and so they speak more about Claw, and T'Challa warns them that Freestone and its people may never be safe. And Ricky Doc again is like, we don't plan on leaving ever. Um, so we'll figure it out. We figured it out this thus far. He's got to find us first, but like we will take, well, I will like remember the fact that you say he's like very dangerous. And then Ricky Doc takes T'Challa to like basically like a safe and gives him the Book of Flowers, which Dabonda had written like all about her her gardening, her work, all of the knowledge she passed down to make kind of the House of Flowers, Arboretum, and Freestone. And then there's this piece of like ancient driftwood that he gives T'Challa, which I think I tried to read this a few times. I feel
Mhm.
like her ashes or something in it. It's kind of like an urn,
Mm.
but it wasn't clear because if you remember, the elders in the ancestral plane say that he must return what was lost. And so this ancient piece of
Yeah.
driftwood he's taking back. And I feel like that is a part of her.
Mm. I think I'm not missed, but, like, didn't think too deeply about that part, but I could see
Yeah.
that.
It's not like explicit. So
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure, but that's kind of how I was reading it. And T'Challa calls Shuri, asks her to draw up plans for a new compound that houses 137 people and a freshwater pond big enough for a whale near the Alchema fields. And I'm like, sir, he said they're not leaving.
Ah, yes,
But
and I could see him just being like contingencies. I wanna be
it
prepared.
is definitely it's a contingency plan because he also like sticks around and like kind of waits for Claw, and then you can tell that he kind of puts into place. Maybe he leaves a war dog or sends a war dog. We're not sure, but like he puts into place some sort of like we're going to keep an eye on that, and if
Mhm.
they have to leave, we'll have this contingency plan. I don't know
Yeah.
how they go with that whale there.
I mean,
Sure, he'll figure it out, but
yeah. I feel like there are ways. People they
I just
move. Are there whales
personally,
in captivity? Yeah?
there are whales in captivity, but they're not transporting them from Mississippi
No.
to East Africa.
No. But they got vibranium.
They're gonna have to knock that poor sucker out. That catfish gonna be stressed. Um, though I assume if they can grow as big as they want, maybe they can also shrink. I don't know.
That'd be interesting.
that'd be interesting. Um, and so he waits around. He doesn't see anything about Claw coming, but you know, has put into place that like they will be able to help their friends if he does come.
Mhm.
And then when he's back and he brings those things back to Adisa is like kind of shocked by the story and by the not heart shaped herb. Um, but she's like looking through the book of flowers, looking at the heart shaped herb, and says, sometimes when a seed wanders far, moved by wind or by fate, its roots can grow strong in strange lands. The old seed can develop new powers that it never needed before. It is no longer its old self, but something new and changed, and it will need new nourishment if it is to survive. And I take that as like a lesson for T'Challa as well as like the heart shaped herb, but the the panther spirit is
Mhm.
moving and it is now with you. And so it needs new nourishment. Like you need to find what nourishes that in you.
Mhm.
You're not your father, you're not your ancestors, right? So like you need to adapt, and the panther spirit needs to adapt to thrive. So
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's also a commentary on, like, diaspora as well,
yeah,
like, more, uh, what's the word?
similarities.
Broadly.
Oh,
No, I'm
gotcha.
saying just, like, pulling that from the, like, actual plot of the story.
Yeah,
Um, because it's definitely, like, the overarching, like, theme of it is, like, this especially T'Challa coming to, um descendants of people who were stolen from Africa and then, like, accusing them of theft, is an interesting thing, and, like, you know, uh, having to, like, come out of that and kind of see, like, both the similarities, the complications, the nuances around like, surrounding all of those, circumstances and, like, identities and stuff, and it's also interesting that he has to go somewhere else in order to kind of, like, find that versus finding that, like, spirituality or, um,
yeah,
solving the problem at home.
yeah, that's true. So that is the heart of the panther. It's my choice story in this anthology. I think that similar to what you were saying, like I really like the ideas that it inspired as well about just how something with the same origins in a different environment changes and thrives. Um,
Mhm,
and also about like what it would be to have kind of the riches of Wakanda in a place that's not isolated. Um,
mhm,
I also just kind of loved the creatures, like the magicalness of the wild ones and Ricky Doc's like relationship to them. And then the story of Dijamoni contrasted with like the Wakandans and T'Challa. Um, and so I think that all of those things really stuck with me. And also it was like one of those stories where I was like, this could be if this was like turned into a full length novel or show or something, I would be like really into this.
mhm.
And I think the commentary on diaspora, like you were saying, is like it's not like it's something new that we've never heard of before, but it's just done in a way that I thought was really like well done. I
Yeah,
also
and it's
love
less
that it's like
like oh, I was gonna say the stakes, they're high, but they're not too high that you can't just, like, take in the message of it, if that makes
yeah,
sense?
yeah,
Like, we're not fighting about it, we're talking about it, and I think that that's,
exactly.
like, interesting too.
And I also just kind of love the idea of like a giant ass catfish and crawfish, and it just is like so black and southern in the fact that like a giant ass dragonfly is like going up for its dude.
Right.
protecting the turf. Uh, yeah, that's my pick.
A well, there we go. Thank y'all for listening. Um Next week we'll be wrapping up our discussion of Black Panther Tales of Wakanda. So make sure you can join our live recordings. We'll be back next Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Or you can wait till the episode drops on Wednesdays. Don't forget to just check out our social media. We will have like stuff for you to vote on. And like that's where we drop the links and stuff for the recordings. Unless you're in our Discord, then it'll be dropped there too.
Yes. And also, Wizard Team is part of the Black Nerds Create Collective. If you want to keep up with our content, you can check out our website at blacknerdscreate.com. Follow us on Instagram and Tumblr at Wizard Team Pod and at Black Nerds Create. The Fill Your Tote campaign has been extended to the 31st, so do that. And we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.